Hey, everybody, and thank you for joining. I know we were out last week, but we are back tonight with another episode of the Let's Get Plugged podcast. I am LaShawn Davis. I am the founder and the CEO of the HR Plug, where we focus on, culture, unplugging, and just making sure that you're plugged into your potential in everything that you do. And on this platform, we like to provide resources and tools that equip leaders, organizations, and employees alike to understand how to advocate for themselves at work and lead organizations that result in healthy workplace cultures. Because that's what it's all about for us. And what we've learned over time is that a lot of employees unnecessarily suffer because they don't have access to the awareness or access to knowledge or things that, are important for them to do well at work. So that is why we are here. That is why we're here tonight. And if you have any questions or anything that comes up and you want to chat about it, be sure to drop it in the chat. Let me know you're here. Say hello. I'm excited to be here with you this evening. And tonight, we just have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about unions. And as I think about this topic and I think about why, I decided to talk about it is number one, as you know, I'm very passionate about employees having healthy workplace environments. Number two, I recognize there's a lot happening in the environment today as it relates to unions, as it relates to what recently happened with Amazon and the gentleman who led this charge over 2 years to get the first Amazon warehouse unionized. And that is something definitely to be proud of. That is something that, this young man who started this charge should really be proud of accomplishing because Amazon is a giant. And I think I read an article and it was referring to it like David and Goliath. So, it's definitely a giant, definitely something that took a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to do. And I do not want to take that lightly. And I do also want to make clear that, myself, the HR Plug, our organization, we are not anti-union. I do believe that unions serve a purpose. I do believe that they add value when necessary and required. But we are also of the mindset that we are pro-employee. It's really about helping employees decide what it is that they want, providing them neutral, objective information because the union's not going to do it. Your company can't do it and won't do it, and we'll talk about why that is. But tonight, I just want you to focus on your situation at work. What are you facing? Are you working at maybe like a Starbucks that's going through a lot of union turmoil right now? Are you working at an Amazon warehouse facility and you're wondering, could this potentially happen where I work? Or are you working for Apple, Google, so many companies out there, REI, that are introducing themselves to this union landscape in industries where unions were not prevalent before? So we're going to talk about that tonight, and we're going to answer any questions that you have over in the chat. If you have them, be sure you let me know because, again, I want to make sure that I am addressing what it is that you need. And before we do that, I do want to remind you that our broadcast is also on the podcast. It's also on streaming on all platforms where podcasts currently stream. So if you can't check us out live on YouTube, make sure that you tune in to check us out live anywhere else that you might listen to your podcast on Apple Music or wherever that might be because we're there excitingly. So wanted to share that with you guys. And then I also want to give you an opportunity to chat. Let me know you're here. Say hello. How are you doing? Where are you coming from? And if you have a question as I go through this process, be sure to also let me know that as well, because I do have a presentation prepared to show you some visuals and keep things going. But I also want to make sure that I'm answering the questions that you might have. So be sure to let me know if you have a question, if there's something that you want me to address. And let me make sure I get my screen up so I can make sure you that I can answer any questions that you have. My computer just kind of froze a minute, so I just want to make sure I can get that. So If you can see me and you're looking at my screen, definitely pay attention. If you're watching this live, definitely pay attention and make sure you go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let me know that you're interested in this content, and um, that way I'll know to keep things coming and keep things moving and presenting information that you would like to see. Also, I want to remind you guys that we are also on Facebook as well and LinkedIn. If you're not on YouTube, you can definitely check us out there live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, jumping into this topic, we are talking about unions and understanding how unions do and do not benefit the workplace. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot that's riding on unions, how, and how they're impacting the world of work. You'll see a lot of companies speaking out vocally about why they do not believe or feel that unions add value for their organization. And we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about what they can and cannot do to you legally if you openly express interest in a union. There are laws that prohibit your employer for taking certain actions against you, like firing you, causing you to lose your job, or anything like that. Or to do anything that would sway you from having to worry about unions as well, to be more favorable or vote for the organization, and we'll talk about that as well. So I just want to let you guys know we're really going to take a deep dive into this. So if you have any questions, you want me to touch on anything specific, be sure you let me know. I got my comments up and running now, so they're working well, and I am ready to answer your questions. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in this, okay? First, I want to talk about how did we get here? How did all of a sudden, in an environment where we weren't really talking about unions that much, how all of a sudden is it now an issue? Back in 1955 was probably the highest union approval rate that there was in our country. It was 75%. There was a 75% approval rate, meaning most Americans agreed, 75% of Americans agreed that unions were good and that we needed them. But by 2009, that number dwindled all the way down to 48%. 2009 was the lowest approval rate that we had here in America for unions. So things were going well in 2009. People started feeling like unions were no longer necessary, and their approval rate or popularity rate dwindled down to 48%. Now, as of August 2021, when the last data was pulled, we are at a 68% favorability rate for unions. Something is absolutely wrong. Why is it that employees are finding a need to want to unionize and there is an approval rate now for it? When unions first came out over 100 years ago, understand that they were only for certain industry types, more like what they call sweatshops, warehousing, manufacturing, all those types of industries where there was poor working conditions, long hours, no breaks. We're talking, 1800s, early 1900s, when it was only about the product and it wasn't about the people. And that's when labor unions were established. That's why you'll find them mostly in the North, where we have manufacturing plants and facilities. Today, how they're in retail stores, how they're in other industries, technology, that is never that's never been heard of. This is new. This is all new territory, not only for the union, but for employers as well. But the question is, how did this happen? What led us here? And I can tell you it started with the coronavirus. The coronavirus and the pandemic and how it riddled the workplace, how it riddled the world of work, is how we got to this position where there's so much dissatisfaction in the workplace. But what I want to clarify are a few things that society makes us believe about the pandemic as it relates to happiness at work that aren't necessarily truth. First, let's walk through what happened with the pandemic. We had the pandemic. People were dying massively. People were sick. This virus was spreading. So it caused companies to have to close their doors. Businesses had to shut down. And as a result of businesses shutting down, people had to get laid off or furloughed from their jobs. Because business was closed and there was no work, because people were not leaving their homes, the societies and governments and states were on shutdowns. So everything kind of froze. There was no commerce. There was no restaurants open. There were no movie theaters open. Everything went on pause. People lost their jobs. There were companies who did it insensitively. They weren't mindful. They didn't care. They didn't give notice. They didn't use compassion through the situation, likely because they too were struggling with how to cope as well. And this is something that, nobody was prepared for. There was no playbook for this. It was solely sporadic, and people were scrambling trying to figure out what to do. Layoffs led to what we coined as a term of essential workers. Essential workers became known as the individuals who were working in jobs that were essential to keeping the economy going, right? So these are the people that could be in corporate, could be customer facing, but they did not face a layoff. They did not face a furlough because we still needed people to do these jobs. Now, this is where things got confusing. People often confused essential workers with frontline workers. And there's a massive difference between the two. Essential workers were able to keep their jobs, right? They didn't lose their jobs and they didn't get furloughed, but all essential workers were not required to go into physically a workplace, subject themselves to the elements of COVID, and work among other people. Those are the frontline workers. The frontline workers are going to be your healthcare professionals. They're going to be the people that worked in general retail areas like a Walmart, like, a Target. The people who worked in pharmacies like a CVS, like a Walgreens. The people who worked in hospitals, all the way from the doctor down to the janitor. Anybody who had to leave their house to perform their job because it was essential to the pandemic was considered a frontline worker. How we treated frontline workers is where the problem stemmed from workplace dissatisfaction, because there were about 70% of essential workers who classified as, 64% of essential workers who were frontline workers who still had to go to work, and we were not prepared to do what we needed to do to make sure that they were safe. We ran out of masks. We didn't instill 6 feet of separation. We didn't provide masks. There was no PPE. But yet we were still expecting these people to come to work. We were still expecting them to put themselves in harm's way. We were expecting them to still save everybody else, albeit a risk for themselves. This group of workers were the people who kept people alive and who kept the economy going. It was these frontline workers. But we hear a lot about essential workers. We don't hear a lot about frontline workers. Now, there's a lot of talk about the Great Resignation, right? This Great Resignation movement that's been happening since 2021, where over 33 million Americans quit their jobs voluntarily. People say they quit their jobs because, they were dissatisfied with their employment situation. And this was problematic because the Great Resignation, based on data and statistics, does not really include frontline workers. If you think about frontline workers, they're the most disadvantaged from the movement, right? And many of them are people of color who could not leverage the Great Resignation because they need their job, they need their income, they needed, their health insurance, they needed to work. The Great Resignation and the thing that went around it was centered around people who were privileged. People who could afford to quit their job and not work. What was this frontline workers? There was a quote that I read in an article, and it says they see this playing out in the news coverage of this Great Resignation. It's like, oh, everybody's banding together and coming together and deciding what they will no longer settle for, what they will no longer handle. And they're calling it or coining it the Great Resignation. But it centers around those who are privileged. And it's at the expense of low-wage workers and people of color who routinely deal with toxic work environment, racism, and constant microaggressions in the workplace. Could this be the frontline workers? They are statistically the lowest paid positions in organizations. However, we had the highest level of need for them during the pandemic. It positioned them to be in a very uncomfortable situation. Frontline workers were undervalued. Frontline workers were underappreciated. Frontline workers were taken advantage of. And it's that taken advantage of, it's that experience for them that made them believe organizations didn't care about their health, their well being, their ability to thrive, their ability to work safely, among others. You had companies that would fire people for attendance because they didn't come to work as a frontline worker because they didn't want to because of COVID. Our government did what they could to, protect them and offer unemployment benefits and things like that, but they did not do enough. There were still people expected to perform jobs for organizations still making massive amounts of money. If a corporation is thriving because of the pandemic and everybody is flocking over to Walmart, and Walmart made record sales during the pandemic, why did they not pay frontline workers more? Why did they not take some of this surplus and do something for frontline workers? Why was there so much controversy around frontline workers asking for more money? Because we needed them to continue to work when others had the luxury to stay at home. It was an unfair situation, and it's something that people don't talk about. There's not enough homage paid to frontline workers, in my opinion, who had to do what they had to do to keep the economy going, whether that's safety from the police department, from emergency response, from firefighters, from sanitation workers, from the garbage collectors, from the people who work in the hospitals, from the teachers who had to still teach and go to schools, the people in the manufacturing warehouse distribution still having to get things processed so that your Amazon order could be timely delivered. How about the people who didn't have the luxury to say, I'm not going to work, or I'm going to walk out of work, or sit at home because they're not paying me enough, because their livelihood and their families are depending on this level of income? Why didn't corporations do better to take care of them? Because had they done that, I do not believe we would be facing this crisis in the workplace that we're facing right now. If you look at these signs, you can remember seeing all of the protests. Keep frontline safe, restore hazard pay, support frontline immigrant workers, PPE now, people before profit, save lives, nurses needs break too. All of this was happening at the same time because frontline workers were fed up. They were fed up to still have these expectations and no support. We forgot frontline workers were people. We did not treat them with care. We did not treat them with compassion. We did not treat them humanely. We expected them to do a job because it was their job, and we didn't take into consideration the environment that was happening around them. Now, I'm not saying this is every organization, and I'm not saying that there weren't good organizations or companies out there. But what I'm saying is there were enough bad ones to stem this movement that we're in right now. The Great Resignation, that was probably more essential workers, but not frontline workers. Frontline workers stood in solidarity. That's why you saw them holding the signs, because they knew we have to do this. We have to get through this because I need my money. I need my paycheck, but I'm not going to go down quietly. So I'm going to stand out here and hold this sign so that people can get PPE and be safe at work. I'm going to stand out here and hold this sign because we need hazard pay back, although you took it away despite making billions more. The frontline workers came together and stood in solidarity, and that's what drew the union interest, because that's the populations that unions support. People who collectively come together for a greater cause to drive improvements in the workplace. That's what piqued the union's interest. Frontline workers were literally advocating for their life. This wasn't just about their rights. This was about their life. This was about that I need to go and be on a unit or on a floor filled to capacity with people on ventilators, people in COVID, and I don't even have an N95 mask because there's no supply. But I still have to go in here and save this life. I can't imagine, because I can't look at the data, how many doctors died, how many nurses died, how many people died trying to save other people's life because we failed them to provide them the PPE that they needed to get their jobs done. We didn't do a good enough job. And the government also didn't do enough job in protecting them either. You had states on the fence of whether or not to mandate masks, understanding that this thing was rapidly growing and rapidly expanding. So all the way around, the frontline workers were the people who were overlooked, They were the people that were undervalued. They were the people that we did not take care of. So they had no choice but to band together, stand in solidarity to take care of themselves. And this is where the union interest began. This is why the young man probably started what he started at Amazon. This is why Starbucks is going through what they're going through right now, because companies have to understand loyalty cannot be bought. It's not about you giving me snacks in the break room. It's not about you telling me, I can have X amount of days off. It's about you taking care of me in the moment based on what my need is, not what you think it should be. Companies failed frontline workers. That is why we're in this situation. If you think about the Great Resignation, think about essential workers, people who had an option, people who had a choice, people who had privilege, people who were working from home and maybe didn't like the way their company was handling things. These people that were a part of the Great Resignation could afford to quit their job and stay home. Everybody cannot afford to do that. And some people were forced to remain in the workplace and deal with the conditions that they were dealt with. That is why we're in this position with union. If you think about non-essential employees, those are the people that were laid off. Those are the people that were furloughed. Those are the people that got unemployment. 9 times out of 10, if you resigned from your job voluntarily, you were not eligible for unemployment benefits. So again, you had a choice and an option to be able to do that. Something that a lot of frontline workers were not able to afford to do. So they were stuck. And I don't know Rebecca Javan, but she's a professor at Rutgers University. And she shared this powerful quote that I want to share with you. She said, "The billionaires have gotten much, much richer over the course of the pandemic, and workers are still struggling. They're scared to leave their jobs because they need their health insurance. And they're doing work that's essential yet treated as disposable. All of these factors coming together has created a moment with a lot of potential. This is why we are in a union environment. This is why people believe that there's more favor with unions, because we failed to take care of the people who were taking care of the people during the pandemic. While companies were making money, we were not investing that money into the employees. They were not investing the money into helping employees, live better, do better. If billions of dollars should not have equated to the $1 to $4 that some people were receiving per hour for hazard pay. We didn't do enough, and now employees believe that the unions can do better for them. So now I'm going to tell you, what are unions? I get this question a lot because a lot of people just don't even understand what they are, because they just haven't been that popular of recent years. So I'm going to give you a quick run through of what unions are and what labor relations is, okay? So unions first, they're a business. They are not a nonprofit organization. They are not doing this because of the goodness of their hearts and they just want to help employees who are in need. They are a legitimate business. They are in the business of representing employees when it comes to dealing or engaging with their employer, but only for certain issues, not everything. So they create an additional layer in the relationship between you and your manager. So whereas today you might have a direct relationship with your manager, you can go to your manager and ask for whatever it is that you need. You can go to your manager if you disagree with something and then they can maybe correct it. You can go to your manager if you want to, promote and interview for a position and go through that process. If you're in a non-union environment, that's what it's like for you today. In a union environment, however, there is a layer in between that, and that layer is governed by a group of people who represent you and negotiate a contract on your behalf to govern the way that the business does business with you as an employee. So when people say, "Oh, we're a family here, we're this and this where we work at," where there's a union, it's not a family, it's a business. Your transactions with your employer are through the union when it comes to certain things. So they're that additional layer. And lastly, they cost. Union support, coverage, representation is not free. It costs the employee what they call dues that is paid every paycheck. You do not have an option not to pay your dues if you are a part of the bargaining unit or the group of people that the contract represents. You can't opt out. You can't, say, I don't want to be governed by these stipulations. I never wanted the union to begin with. None of that matters if there is a contract in play. And your dues comes automatically, generally, out of your paycheck. So you don't have the option to not pay it, and the price of it varies. Some contracts say dues, the more tenure you are, the more you have to pay, because historically, more tenured employees benefit more from the union because most of their governance is based on seniority. So they might charge tenured individuals more money than a new person or a part-time person. All of that would be governed under your contract and depending on how it's negotiated. But it's important to know, to get the full benefit of the union, you're going to be expected to pay a fee and pay a dues. Where does this money go? Well, like I said, it's a business. So people have to get salaries. They have to pay the attorneys that work with them to work on these contract negotiations. So because you're paying for their representation, your dues goes to help them run their business effectively. Just like your CEO has a salary, understand the union has a CEO, they have a salary too. So it is definitely something you want to consider if you are in an environment that's considering unionization, because it's going to cost you if you're represented under this contract. Now, I have seen where they say we won't take a dime until the contract, until we have an agreement, agreement or a contract or a negotiated stipulation with the employer. That might be true. I can't speak to that. I know that there are some unions that start contracts effective once it's established that the union is representing them. And then I know other organizations that will wait until there is an executed contract before they start deducting dues. Either way, it's a question you should ask your union representative if you are in fact engaging with them. When should I expect to have to pay my first payment in dues? And one of my colleagues that I was working with in this space, in this industry, talked about how, she lost her mom as a young adult. And she had siblings that were younger than her, that was still minors, that she ended up being in their care. So she had to quickly become an adult. She got a job working in transportation. And all of a sudden, there were these meetings and people talking about we need a union and this and that. And it was foreign to her. She had no idea what this was, what they were talking about. What is this union mess? But the moment she heard, I got to pay, I can't afford for my money to be coming out of my paycheck. What exactly am I paying for? What are they doing that I can't do for myself? That those are the questions that she started asking. And you'll be surprised to know that there are a lot of things that you can do for yourself as employees that do not require union representation. And we're going to talk about that as well. But if you're in a situation where you're wondering, should we go union? Should I talk about this with my peers? Or if your peers are talking about this with you already, understand what a union is fully. Now, they're not going to just come out and tell you this because they want your business. They're like any other business. The more members they get, the more dues payments they have, the more money they make. So it's a business for them. They have their agendas, they have their goals, they have the things that they want to achieve, just like your organization is a business. They have their agendas, they have their goals, and they have the things that they want to achieve. Both entities are a business. You have to decide what is the right choice collectively for the group. And I say collectively because unions don't work for individuals. They work for the majority. So if I think about the young man that started this Amazon wave, right? He posted a letter that he wrote kind of entailing what happened to him that made him feel over time, over years, that this was the route that he wanted to go. And I read his letter. And in the letter, he starts talking about how he was overlooked, for promotions, or he was blackballed because of poor leadership and leadership, turning against him. And, everything that happened was his personal situation. Through his personal situations, he developed emotion that he was then able to be influential to garner other people to come on board, as to say, you don't want this to happen to you. So this is what you want. Come on over, show support for the union, this and this and this and that. It's important to understand whatever your individual needs are, do not expect the union to be the resolve for them, because the union represents the collective, the majority. So if you're the only student out of a group of 50 and the 50 are looking to be covered by the union, don't expect your contract to have benefits for students. It just doesn't work that way. In a non-union environment, as a student, you might have that ability to work directly with your leader and do something that's beneficial for you or conducive for you for your situation. But once that contract is in play, understand everything is done for the collective. So it's important to know what are the needs of the majority of the people in your group, in your class, in your or your peers, and do your needs align with theirs? Because if they don't, this union will not benefit your organization. Everything in it will be for who it is for. If the majority of your peers or colleagues are tenured and you're not, you want to be mindful of that as well, because the benefits could be more favorable towards people with tenure, and then you're left out, yet you're still having to adhere to this contract and you're still having to pay your union dues. So my guidance and advice to you is understand what the majority of the people in your organization that are eligible to be covered under this contract, what are they looking for? What are they looking for the organization to do? And do those needs benefit you? Because if they don't, a union may not be favorable for you. And everybody that's covered under the contract will have an opportunity to vote. And remember, no one will know how you vote. It's an anonymous process. So don't feel pressured because you may have vocal employees or peers or colleagues telling you, get the union in, get the union in, if it's not something that's going to work for you. Because you're going to be stuck under this contract as long as you remain employed in that location. And contracts can be in place for years. The minimum I've seen is 3 years that you're stuck to the terms of that contract. And we're going to talk about how that could hurt you or help you depending on what your individual need is. So a bit of advice here. If you're faced with a union situation, if you're working at an organization that's looking to unionize, try to understand from the other people in your circles or in your groups, what is it that we collectively agree on as issues here? Because again, if there's a misalignment, that contract will not be suitable or beneficial for you as an individual. Unions do not work for the individual. They work for the group. Okay? So what exactly do they do? We talked about you having to pay this dues. We talked about they negotiate a contract. But what do they have power to do, or what do they have the power to change? And it's not everything conducive to your work environment. There are some things that unions cannot do, and there are some things that they can do. So this slide here talks about what exactly they can do for you. And everything is negotiable. So let me make that point. If you're in a campaign right now and you're encountering union organizers right now, they cannot promise or guarantee you anything. They cannot say, we guarantee to get you $1 more. They cannot say, we guarantee to get you $10 more. There are no guarantees with a union. The only guarantee is that you'll have to pay dues and that there'll be a contract that will have to be negotiated with the employer. So the employer has to agree to the terms of the contract in order for it to be valid. So if you think that the union is going to do something radically crazy, like buy everybody a BMW car because the union says that they can get that, think again. Because anything that's in this contract, understand your employer has to agree to. Unreasonable requests will not be honored. And all your employer has to do is bargain in good faith. They just have to make an effort and try to come to an amicable solution or agreement with the union in order for it to be valid or to come through. So remember that. So when I talk about wages, yes, a union can negotiate the terms of your wages. Yes, they can say every year you'll get a 25 cents increase. Yes, they can predetermine what that amount can be for the years and the duration of the contract. Okay, that is something that unions have the power to bargain over. They just cannot guarantee you what that will be or what that will look like. And remember, it's going to apply to everybody. No matter how strong of a performer you are, how weak of a performer you are. Generally in a contract, it applies across the board. So if you currently work for an organization and there's a pay by performance, whereas if you exceed expectations, you have an ability to get a higher increase than someone who may not exceed expectations, and the budget is curved that way, Understand, in a union environment, generally it's an across the board thing. Everybody covered under this contract in that classification will get the same amount of increase at the same date as the contract stipulates. Okay. And again, it's something that has to be agreed upon. When you think about benefits, they can negotiate terms of your benefits. They can negotiate terms of, what type of coverage you get, how much you pay in your premiums, and, all of that. They can negotiate that on your behalf. When it comes to safety, they help you make sure that you're working safely. They can help you from having in the contract when your employer has to give you new PPE, or when, there has to be more than one person in a facility so that there's two people so that they're safe. Safety issues is something that they can help you and support you with. Workplace conditions, it's very broad. But your schedules, how much overtime you work, when you get overtime, how much overtime notice you get before you get overtime, all of that is something that can be negotiated in a contract. Your holidays, that can be negotiated in a contract. Job movement, like if you want to demote or promote, that is negotiable in a contract as well. So if you think about today, you might be able to interview for a job and go through a competitive process, and you perform more, stronger than someone else, then that might give you a higher opportunity to get that job. In a union environment, generally you have to bid on jobs, and the bid order is based on seniority. Okay, so think about things like that, because that will impact how you can conceivably grow with the organization if you're looking to do that. The facilities conditions, mold, things like that, leaky roofs, pest control, or rodents, all that kind of stuff, your union can support you in getting, assistance with to get resolved if your employer isn't doing what they need to do to take care of you. Pay increases and incentives. So not just what a starting salary rate is, but also when you get an increase, how often you get an increase, or if you get a bonus, how often you get a bonus. All of that is negotiated. The only watch out for that is if you have a contract that's effective for 3 to 5 years, understand that contract is going to be negotiated 3 years sooner than the effective date. So it's 2022 right now. In 2025, you don't know what the economy is going to be like. We don't know what the state of that company is going to be like, but understand there's no deviation from what the contract says. If it says a quarter, and your company acquired another business and now they're making buku money and can afford to give you 75 cents, they're only going to give you the quarter because that's what the contract says. So understand, the contract is what's going to govern what the organization does for you. The union can also authorize a strike. They can authorize a strike when they believe they've exhausted all means of working to a solution with your employer. And the strike, of course, it brings attention. The union carries weight. They have political support. So they have the backing and they have the support and the things that you may need to get the needle moving in any of these areas that you might be struggling with for your work. As long as it's something collective, as long as it's something that, is a shared concern with all of your peers, the union could very well be beneficial for your organization, but only in these areas, okay? What unions have no power, authority, or control in is toxic leadership. They cannot say who you report to. They cannot do anything about bad leaders, bad bosses, people who are rude, disrespectful, bullying, any of that. The union has no authority or power over. So yes, while they can take care of some of those terms of employment, they can't control who your supervisor is. They cannot also control discrimination or any violations of that have to do with conduct based from your manager. They have no authority to write your manager up. They have no authority to fire your manager. They have no authority over anybody that's not covered under the contract. Okay? Performance standards. They cannot change what your business expects for you to do your job. If you don't like, working in this department, and you think a union's going to be able to help you not have to work in this department, you're sadly mistaken. How the business runs their business is not anything the union can assist you with. It's not anything that's going to be covered under the contract. It's not anything that they can change. They cannot change your leader. They cannot change your supervisor. They cannot even change the schedule that you work. Okay, so understand what the business needs to operate. If they decide to reduce hours, extend hours, change store hours, the union has no say in any of those matters. Okay, they also cannot control terminations. So if your company decides they have enough cause to terminate you, and they're not violating the contract in doing so, meaning that they follow the progressive process, if it's outlined in there, they can terminate you, even if the union disagrees. The union has no authority to tell them who they can and cannot hire or fire in their organization. What the union can do is they can help you grieve it, go through a grievance process, go through an arbitrator, a mediator. But meanwhile, you're not working, you're not employed, and your employer doesn't have to, keep you employed there if they believe there's reason justifiable to terminate your employment. So the union cannot save you from termination. They can, however, negotiate processes and structure so that if you do get terminated, you understand what is it going to cost you to get terminated, and the process that the employer has to do before you get terminated. But if you've reached the threshold of termination, they cannot stop that. Okay. We talked about management layoffs. They cannot control if your company decides to close a facility and you get laid off. The union cannot stop that. What they can do is maybe negotiate the terms of your layoff, and how much notice you have to get before a layoff, but they cannot stop you from getting laid off. The unions have no control over anything that's not covered in that contract. So if it's not wages, benefits, workplace conditions, it's not going to be in your contract. So anything that's outside of the scope of those parameters, the union cannot support you in. And that's why I believe it's so misleading to believe that unions are a savior, or unions can help improve certain things when it comes to bad management or poor leaders or toxic work environments, because they cannot. They have no authority to hire or fire any leader in your organization. So if you're believing like you're dissatisfied with your workplace because of your leader, a union isn't going to help you with that. So that's not the route you may want to go. You may not want to pay a dues for representation on a matter that your union can't even do anything about. So also, what do I think the real solution is? The real solution is government action, because both of these entities are a business. They're both in it to get money. Your employer wants to be profitable. Unions want to be profitable. Who governs this space is the government. The government needs to increase minimum wage. If they increase minimum wage, then we wouldn't have companies who believe it's okay to pay people low. Companies have to pay within the confinements of what the law requires. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour and has not changed since 2009. That's a problem. If the government believes it's okay to pay people $7.25 an hour, the government finds that to be a considerable wage. Why not change that? And how do you then expect an employer to treat you better? Companies need to understand that, or I should say employees need to understand that the companies are going to do what legally they're allowed to do. And if the legal entity isn't doing what they need to do to take care of their employees, what makes you think your company is going to do it? The government needs to take action to improve the work conditions that employees experience. They need to hold organizations accountable to treating people right. There are no laws right now in the United States that prohibit or prevent anti-bullying, workplace bullying. Why is that? Canada has laws. Other countries have laws. Why is it that the United States has no laws in place that prohibit a leader from bullying, or define what bullying is, or say that it's intolerable for the work? They don't. Because if there were laws that prevented leaders from behaving badly, or had consequences for leaders who behave badly, and if there were better expectations of pay from the federal government for employers, two of the things that lead people to want unions to begin with would be resolved. Being treated properly and being paid a livable wage. There's no accountability for corporations to behave in any way that's respectful for employees. And that's deplorable from our government. We also don't offer any paid sick leave. Why is that? People often confuse the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, as an entity that can help you if you're sick and cannot work. While it does, it only grants you job protection. It does not grant you pay. And what you find is people having to make decisions on, do I come to work sick at the risk of not getting a paycheck? Why would we as a company, why would we as a corporation or corporation believe that that's okay? Why would we as a government believe that that's okay? How can we expect CEOs, organizational leaders to treat employees correctly when our government doesn't even provide the channels to do that? They have to care about people. They have to care about employees, and there's not enough of that happening. My biggest pet peeve with the Biden administration right now is that he is very vocal and a huge proponent of labor unions. He encourages people to go out and get labor unions, and to the point where he's now limiting federal funding for companies who do not allow people to be recognized by labor unions easily. My perspective on that is employees should not have to pay money to be treated fairly or correctly. Our government has a responsibility to take care of employees, not pawn it off on the National Labor Relations Board to do. Why aren't they taking more care or consideration for what's happening in everyday working Americans' lives? They were proudly boasting how a cabinet in Congress or some employees in Congress or something wanted a union. And I think it was Nancy Pelosi who was proudly saying, I support my employees to organize and get a union. And I was just floored because all that's saying, Nancy, is that you're ineffective as a leader and you're not taking care of their needs. The only reason why employees go to unions is because they're not getting what they need from their employer. Why isn't the employer held accountable to take care of their employees? That's the push on the government. The government is to blame for some of this because they are allowing this behavior to continue with no accountability whatsoever. When I think about paid sick leave, the poorest of countries offer paid sick leave. We are one of the most highly advanced companies that lead in everything else, but we don't lead in how to take care of our people. That's embarrassing. And we don't even have anything that talks about paid sick leave where we give people money so that they can stay home and get better if they're genuinely sick. Why is it that our government isn't doing better to provide these avenues and these resources for employees, or simply put, to model an example of what care and concern looks like for employees by showing care and concern for American citizens? They don't do it. That is the problem, and this is the solution for our government to take action, instill these laws, increase minimum wage, have anti-bullying laws, offer paid sick leave, make it easier for employees to enjoy the work that they do by holding companies that right now are blinded by greed and profits who have forgotten about people. It's a simple solution, and it's nothing that a union can do for you. And it's nothing that but it is something your employer can do for you if they're held accountable to those standards. You have rights without the union. I want you guys to understand that. Do not believe that a union is your only recourse. There is power in numbers. There is something called protected concerted activity, which is a statement under the National Labor Relations Act law that says collectively you and another peer, co-worker can band together, can walk out of a job, can demand higher wages, can demand better work conditions, can contact any governmental agency, whether it's the Department of Labor, whether it's OSHA, whoever it is, and stand in solidarity together for your rights. You don't need a union to do that. You don't need to pay somebody to do what you could very well do for yourself. Just 10.3% of the U.S. employees belong to a union in 2019. So all of these protests, all of these walkouts that you saw all over the news, the slide I showed earlier with all the people holding the signs, talking about PPE over profits and all of that, a lot of those people weren't even in a union, but they still made a statement. Because you know what happens is, the more public you are with your issue, and now we're in the world of social media, and if your employer isn't doing what they need to do to take care of you, and you've given them an opportunity to do that, and you take it to the streets, the community will back you. The community will get involved. When I read the articles about Starbucks and I looked at the pictures, a lot of those were not even employees. They were the community backing them because they do believe that employees needed better conditions, better pay, better treatment from their employers. You don't need a union. There's power in the collectives. Okay? Many of the people who went on strike or organized walkouts were not represented by a union. There's ways that you can show your employer the value that you bring to the organization as a unit, as a group. If you guys can collectively come together, demand to have a meeting with your CEO, demand to have a meeting with your leader of your organization. Don't be shy to share what your concerns are and collectively together request what it is you need to make it better. My caution is to be reasonable with your request and be open to hearing their response. Sometimes we have expectations without having the full story and understanding what it is that the company is working on, what their budget looks like. We have these misconceptions that these companies are rich, rich, rich. Some of them are not, but I would say band together, advocate for at least to have the dialogue so that you can show that you're making a concerted effort to improve your work conditions. This is relevant for pay, benefits, overtime, lack of work-life balance, all of those things that the union can help you negotiate better terms for are the same factors that you and your peers can collectively speak to leadership on your own about. Most companies want to have a direct relationship with their employers. That's why they come off anti-union, but it's not so much so that they're anti-union, more so they believe that they can work together with you. The problem is employees don't give them an opportunity or a chance to do that. You don't give your CEO a chance to say no because you haven't asked them for hazard pay. You haven't asked them for, better hours, or you haven't asked them for things that will help you be more safe at work with your peers. I'm not saying you individually write an email. I'm saying collectively take 50 of your peers and all of you guys together write an email. There's power in numbers. You're doing exactly what it is that the union would do for you anyway. But use your courage, use your confidence to do it on your own because you do have rights without the union. I was going to just run through really quickly some scenarios to help connect this all together for you and so that you fully understand what it is a union is and how it works. And then you can make an informed decision. Is this something that you want to proceed with moving forward? So scenario one, I'm a student. I require flexible scheduling because of my classes. They change every semester. So right now my supervisor works with me to adjust as needed. Would my schedule flexibility be impacted if my workplace decides to unionize? The answer is yes. If your workplace unionizes in this scenario, then unfortunately your leader will lose the flexibility that they have currently because they'll have to be governed by this contract. These scenarios that I'm putting up also understand were actual questions that people asked that I wanted to share in case other people watching or listening have these same questions. So understand if you have special arrangements right now because of your unique situation with scheduling, that flexibility could go away if now your schedules are governed by a contract. Okay, scenario two, I'm a full-time employee. Right now, I make an average of 32 hours per week. I want to make 40 hours, but my store doesn't have enough hours budgeted to give full-time employees 40 hours. If my workplace unionizes, could I have 40 hours guaranteed as a full-time employee? The answer is yes. A union can guarantee all full-time employees get 40 hours a week. However, if you remember earlier, I told you they have no control over the amount of payroll hours allocated to a location. So if a location has 10 people who are full-time and the company can afford for those 10 people to get 32 hours a week and they all still maintain their benefits and they all still maintain their full-time status, and then you decide, well, I want 40 hours a week, and so you get a union and they negotiate this in the contract, and now all full-time employees have to get 40 hours a week, where do you think those hours are going to come from? The union cannot make the payroll budget grow for the store. So what happens is you have to travel to other stores to get your 40 hours. That's one option. If there are no other stores for you to get 40 hours in, then you're faced with a situation where you may have to demote to part-time status, or your company will have to lay off full-time employees. That's the caveat here. So yes, they can guarantee you the hours, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get them easily. It doesn't mean you may not have to travel to get your hours, and it doesn't mean that the company may end up having to lay people off because they cannot afford everybody at full-time status to get 40 hours. So these are things that you need to consider Because the union's not going to tell you that. They're not going to say, yeah, we can guarantee you 40 hours. However, it might mean X, Y. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to tell you, yeah, we can guarantee you 40 hours. We can absolutely negotiate those terms, or we can get you more than 32 hours. But you need to think about the impact on what that means if they have no control over the payroll hours allocated for the store. Scenario 3, I have a manager who is ineffective. He's unclear with work assignments and he's overall a poor leader. To make things worse, his communication style is awful and he sometimes yells when he's frustrated. Could a union do anything about a toxic leader? And we already know the answer to that is no. With or without a contract, you're still stuck with this ineffective manager who's unclear with work assignments and is an overall poor leader. Nothing will change with the union in this scenario. Scenario number 4, I've been with the company for only 1 year, but I've excelled in my role and I'm interested in promoting to the next level. There are other employees who've been here longer, but I've consistently received higher metric outcomes than they have. Would a union help me promote faster? No. The union will not help you promote faster. The union will collectively come up with a process that is fair and equitable for all people, regardless of tenure, regardless of performance, that will help people promote in the company. So if you're only a year in and there are 75 other people that have more than a year of experience and they're all interested in the same job you're interested in, you got to wait till those 75 people have an opportunity before you can be considered for that role. That's how the union works because they feel like that's what's fair and that's what they strive to do. What's fair, again, remember, for the collective, not the individual. Scenario number 5, we work in a grocery store that has rat infestation and a leaky roof. The leaks have caused water to settle, and it looks like there's mold in the break room. We've complained about it to our management team, but they don't care and they take no action. Would a union be able to help us fix this facility issue? The answer is yes. What the union could not do, though, is get a general contractor out there to fix it and pay for them to do that. But they would have to work with your organization to help put some muscle behind your request, or they will contact OSHA on your behalf and ask OSHA to come and do a site assessment. Now, understand you don't need a union to contact OSHA. If you're faced with workplace conditions that are horrific, you can contact OSHA yourself. If you don't know how to contact OSHA, you can go to your break room because the federal government does require them to post it in the break room how to report unsafe working conditions in your facility or place of where you work. So while a union can help in this area, it's also something that you don't need a union to do. Number 6, I'm a bus driver and I drive a route in the city. The route is more of a scenic route. And there are other ways to get to the stops quicker than what they've plotted. These routes waste time and seem inefficient. Would a union be able to assist me with an improved route? The answer is no. The union has no say on what work assignments look like or, how the company develops routes or things like that they wouldn't be able to change your route because you have them to help you with the situation. We're in the middle of a contract. Other non-union locations received a bonus due to excess funding available at the end of the year. We were unable to receive this bonus. Our employer said they could not give us a bonus because of the contract. Is this true? So the answer is yes. And this happens a lot. You're in a contract or you're covered by a union. The company magically has all this excess money that they need to get rid of by the end of the year. So they decide to give everybody a $1,000 bonus. If you're in a union, chances are you probably would not be able to get that $1,000 bonus because being in a union means that you said you don't want to work directly with your employer. You'd rather work with the union. And if the union didn't negotiate any type of $1,000 bonus in your contract 3 years ago when they negotiated this contract, you would be ineligible to receive it because even if it's a favorable thing, if your employer does it and it's outside of the contract, it's against the contract. They cannot do it. They can't do favorable or unfavorable. Now, if your employer cared enough, they could contact the union and ask to renegotiate terms so that you all could get this bonus or ask permission to give you guys this bonus, but they could not arbitrarily or freely do it like they did for the other people in, the organization. So when I think about Starbucks, for example, and how I think it's like 9 stores that are right now union, if the CEO of Starbucks decided, you know what, I'm going to give everybody who was getting hazard pay or a $5 increase, we're just going to roll it into, their starting rate, or we want to do something special for them and give everybody a $500 bonus or something to that effect, those 9 stores that now have union representation likely would not be eligible for that because they've decided they don't want to reap benefits or work with the employer. They want to work with the union, so they would have to go to their union. Now, in a contract, your union can decide also, well, you know what? We got this contract, deal with it. We're not going to do anything for you. Just like there are bad leaders, there are bad unions. Just like there are bad organizations, there are bad unions. Just like there are toxic leaders, there are toxic union representatives, okay? It works both ways. Understand when they're trying to get your business, they come off one way, but understanding who they truly, really are, you want to do your research. Find out what other companies they support or represent. Talk to other employees who are under those bargaining unit agreements. How has the experience been for them? Get real life examples from people who are in a union to understand what happens when there's a disagreement or what happens when things go wrong. You want to do your research before you decide if you want to get in a union, because again, you are stuck and confined to whatever the agreement is and whoever that union is. No matter if they're horrible, after a contract is signed, you're still stuck with them. Okay, so keep that in mind. I've been with the company over 10 years and have earned 5 weeks of PTO to use per year. Will I be able to keep my PTO allowance if my location decides to go union or have union representation? This is going to be up to the contract. As a tenured employee, you very well could lose your 5 weeks of PTO time that you get because your union decides they represent your benefits and your tenure has to start over, or your time has to start over, or your time counts as being connected to the union, not the organization. These are questions you want to ask before you agree to a contract. If you're a tenured employee and you have a lot of weeks of vacation, right, but you're outnumbered by a lot of newbies who don't have any weeks of vacation, a union might be advantageous for them because they'll get something that they don't get now. But what are you losing so that they can get that? Ask questions, especially as a tenure, if the benefits that you love, whether it's lump sum bonuses or whatever it is, you want to ask, what happens to my seniority with the organization if we decide to go union? Does my status restart? Do I lose my tenure? Is it starting over from when we're a part of your contract? Because that very well could affect your benefits, okay? I am pro-union and am working to have a union campaign in my organization. My employer has been very clear that we do not need a union, but I disagree. Can my employer fire or demote me for wanting to organize a union? The answer is no. It's illegal for them to do that. It's also illegal for them to make any threats against you for wanting to do this. So they cannot say, you know what, Kimberly, if you join a union or form a union, I'm going to fire you. It's against the law if they do that. It's also against the law for them to ask you questions. They cannot say, Kimberly, do you want a union? Why do you want a union? What are we not doing for you? That's considered interrogation. They can't do that. They can't even ask you. They should not know what your sentiments are for a union because they should be treating you the same regardless. So do not feel compelled to have to tell them what your union sentiments are or if you want a union or not. They cannot ask you. You do not have to tell them. Now, if you want to be vocal about it, wear the button, wear the t-shirt, whatever, that's your choice, but they cannot ask you about it. They also cannot make any promises to you. They cannot say, if you don't get a union, we promise to give everybody $2 more an hour. It's illegal. They cannot do that. They also cannot sit in on any kind of union meetings you're having. They can't use video surveillance that might be in the store to monitor what you're talking about if you're having a union meeting in the break room when you're off the clock or things like that. So they can't do that either. All they can do is tell you facts about the union and tell you their opinion. That's it. Anything outside of that, asking you anything about the union is illegal. So understand what your rights are here because, if they are asking you or they are pressuring you or they are threatening you, you definitely want to let your organizer know this. You definitely want to report that because you should not feel like you can't organize because the company just because the company doesn't want it. It's your right. It's your right to be able to form a union, organize a union, participate in organizing a union, and it's also your right to do none of it. You don't even have to have any say in forming, joining, or voting for the union either. So it's completely your right. Just make sure that you, educate yourself on your employer's responsibility so that you're not finding yourself fired for a reason that's illegal. All right. And the last example, I work for an employer who has had the same union for over 50 years. We find the contract to be too restrictive. And no one, even the workers, no one even works here who was a part of the getting the union started to begin with. Would my employer be able to assist us to end our relationship with the union? And the answer to that is no. It is also illegal for your employer to help you do what's called decertify a union. If you're working in an organization right now and you are dissatisfied with their union, you don't want them anymore, you don't want them to represent you anymore, you can go to the National Labor Relations Board website, nlrb.gov, and research how to decertify a union. Is something that the employees in the bargaining unit covered by the contract have to collectively do together. It's the same process. You will collect the signatures, then you would vote, and the majority of the vote will just make the determination whether or not the union stays or goes. But your employer can have nothing to do with that scenario. So the resources I want to share with you, the NLRB is a resource. You can also go to my website, book a consultation if you want to have more questions or you want to talk through if a union is good for you. My website is www.thehrplug.com. You can also send direct message me send me a message on LinkedIn, send me a message on Instagram, send me a message at the HR plug on all social media streams if you just have a question. I also posted this on my Instagram, so if you don't follow me on Instagram, make sure you go over to the HR plug's Instagram page. Go ahead and click the follow button and ask whatever question you have on that public thread as well, so that others who see it might be able to get an answer for you. Again, unions is not something to take lightly. I am very happy that the employees in Amazon voted for what they felt was best for their situation. But I also know that unions are not for everybody in every situation. So make sure that you educate, inform yourself, do your research, ask questions. The union can be very aggressive. They will come to your house. They will call you. They will repeatedly, email you. They will find ways to get in contact with you because they want your business, because they are a business. So remember, everything that comes with the business, the good and the bad, will come with the union. The same things that you encounter with your employer, you could also encounter that with the union. So do your research, make good decisions, make the right decisions, and work collectively with your employees on what you all want to do, because that's how, it's going to unfold for you. And so some comments we said, Kimberly Jones, hi Kim, thank you for joining. I appreciate this information and it's helpful for employees. What's sad is that employees feel as though they need protection from their employer. And that is very sad. And that's where I think the government needs to do a better job in holding these employers accountable, because employees should not have to fight to be respected, treated well in a place that they're dedicating their time and talents to. It's ridiculous, right? You wouldn't stay in a relationship with someone who treated you badly after all the good you're doing for them. And that's what we're expecting employees to do. Stay in a relationship with these employers who are treating them badly and not treating them well. So thank you, Kimberly, for that. Deetra, hi, how are you? This is such valuable information. It is, and it's still a lot. There's a lot I did not cover because I didn't want to make this too cumbersome, but I just wanted to give a brief overview of what you could expect. And, if you're dealing with the situation with a union, if you work for Amazon, if you work for Apple, if you work for Google, if you work for REI, if you work for Starbucks, if you work for any of these organizations that are right now encountering union issues or union activity, do your research, share this podcast, talk to people so that you can make an informed decision, because the worst thing that could happen is that you can be stuck in a contract that doesn't benefit you at all, and you're paying for that representation that you're not even using. Okay. So Gloria says, this is really good. So valid. Thank you so much, Gloria, for joining. Thank you guys also, for joining. Again, be sure to connect with me on social media, and please subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. You like this information. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that I can know that you like this information too. Thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate your time and attention. I hope you found this information helpful. I'm always available to ask additional questions, or if you need a part 2 to this, happy to do that as well. Drop it in the comments. Send it in my DM and let me know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and how I can support you. Until next week, Let's Get Plugged podcast Wednesday at 8 p.m. I will see you then. Take care.